Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tizengauzen. Today is August 13th and we have a lot of important and interesting news. In this episode, strikes on the Druzhba oil pipeline, a refinery, and a very interesting facility in Tatarstan. What is the Ethylene 600 project that was hit? And of course, the absolutely fantastic terms for ending the war proposed by the Kremlin. They have already been announced. Britain is urging European Union leaders not to irritate Trump ahead of Alaska, or something irreversible might happen. Meanwhile, Orban, Fico, and Georgia's Dream party have suddenly started following the same playbook. All this and more in today's episode. There's a lot of interesting stuff ahead. So, if this is your first time on this channel, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. So, in the Russian Federation, absolutely nothing is changing. The Russian Ministry of Defense comes out with a statement claiming that right before the summit in Alaska, the armed forces planned a provocative strike on one of the densely populated residential districts in Kyiv, which is in the Kharkiv region, or on a hospital, supposedly to frame Russia and show a large number of casualties on the eve of this summit. And they also claim that responsibility for the strike will be placed on Russia. Foreign journalists have already been brought in to prepare reports and create a negative media backdrop. But where were these foreign journalists brought in? They've all been here for a long time already. Sometimes we even have to issue warnings, or in some cases, even revoke accreditations so that they don't film and broadcast the strikes live. And the fact is, every day, guided bombs, ballistic missiles, and drones are flying over Ukrainian cities, now mostly over the frontline cities. And as for who is demolishing entire apartment blocks with civilians inside, that doesn't require any provocation. Russia simply does what it does, and nothing needs to be added. Yes, objectively, the number of attacks deeper inside Ukraine has decreased now. But all of this is just so that this Botoxed slimeball can wrap himself in a sheep's skin for a while, pretend to be a peacemaker so that, God forbid, sanctions aren't imposed. By the way, it's often mentioned in the comments that Putin himself won't fly to Alaska. Well, of course he wants to, he really does. And this is legitimization. He's on magazine covers with Trump. That's just a dream come true. They're dragging him out of his bunker with all their might and trying to make him look like some kind of half peacemaker. But there are just too many risks for him. And he's a real paranoiac too. Anyway, soon it will be clear who will actually come. If the one who arrives looks old, tired, and worn out like he did on Valam, then maybe it's the real one. But if the one who arrives is chubby-cheeked and smooth-faced, then, well, they've just sent one of the replicants. So, about these arrivals, a very interesting target was hit today, and not for the first time. Well, first of all, today drones hit two more oil refineries, the Volgograd refinery and Slavyansk Eco. The Volgograd refinery is one of the largest, 15.7 million tons per year. So it really is one of the biggest. Let me remind you, since the beginning of this month, 3 refineries have already suspended operations. Gasoline prices in Russia are rising every day, and there are no reserves. In other words, the Russian government is convening an emergency meeting on this issue for tomorrow. They had to release, let me remind you, an additional amount onto the market, onto the foreign market, an extra amount of crude oil, because there's no one and nothing to process it. And now they'll have to release even more. Right now, they released 200,000 barrels, but now they need to release 430 to 450,000, because Saratov, Ryazan, and Novokuybishevsk have all shut down and are waiting for repairs. And then there's this interesting facility, which was hit by drones from the Ukrainian Security Service, or as we call it here, the Lord Service, in Tatarstan. You might remember, it's that giant logistics warehouse. Drones are fiercely targeting it. This happened just the other day, and then it was hit again. The warehouse is located 1,300 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. What's interesting is that this logistics terminal turns out to be part of a joint Russian-Chinese project, a massive industrial park that is supposed to be built, And this project is called Ethylene 600. And just so you understand how much of a Russian-Chinese project this is, the terminal that was hit by the drones is called the Deng Xiaoping Logistics Terminal. So, it's all pretty clear here. This dedicated terminal facility is specifically designed and intended to receive one full train from China per day, directly loaded with numerous containers, efficiently process it upon arrival, and then subsequently send one complete train back in the opposite direction. So it's real integration there. And the drones targeted it because, according to statements from Ukrainian security forces, including the security service, both finished Shaheds and spare parts for them are stored at this terminal. Parts that arrive, guess where from. So basically, that's how things have turned out. And by the way, this terminal, let's put it this way, now will combine everything into an even bigger project. This terminal was built by that very same alabuga, where different school kids and students assemble drones by hand. Well, you remember that report? Black drones and huge corridors where all those drone bodies are displayed to show off, to intimidate the whole world with how many Shaheds we can produce here. So it's all one single complex. Either things arrive at this terminal or they're shipped out from here. Not far from here is Alabuga itself, along with Alabuga Polytechnic and all the various closed facilities. There you have it. So, if anyone in the West thinks that Russia is just building these huge technoparks and free economic zones where drones are assembled, shipped, received, and constructed just like that, and that they can be stopped later, well, you are very much mistaken. You are very much mistaken. In fact, our Western partners could take this opportunity to make things much easier for themselves right now. What if there's a future war with the Russian Federation? While Ukraine still has the opportunity to strike Russia, while the war is not over, they could give us the necessary long-range weapons and wipe Alabuga off the face of the earth, as well as that Deng Xiaoping terminal with all its valuable machinery at Alabuga Polytechnic and the invaluable personnel who have come there from different countries to help, to teach, and so on. Because, just guess exactly where all those Shaheds will ultimately fly, the very ones they'll meticulously pack into that initial terminal and then subsequently move into some more secure and protected storage facilities. Where do you think they'll go after the war in Ukraine is over? What do you think? Well, that's not all. Today, the armed forces of Ukraine finally struck the largest node of the Druzhba oil pipeline in the Bryansk region, in the settlement of Unecha. This is the linear production dispatching station. Excellent. It's great that they've started targeting the oil and gas infrastructure. It's not enough, we need to do more, but I hope we will. And by the way, speaking of doing more, friends, let me remind you, we have an important fundraiser for FPV drones with fiber optics for the 101st Brigade. Right now they're holding Chasev Yar, taking out Russians in droves, holding the line, holding strong. Today, the deputy commander sent me a voice message. He says, we're holding the line, we're not going anywhere, we're destroying all this filth. So friends, I really ask you to support the fundraiser for FPV drones. They are extremely necessary for our soldiers right now. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video and also in the comments. There's private, there's mono, and there's PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. I always thank you immensely on my own behalf and on behalf of our soldiers who are defending us and our country. Huge gratitude from them as well. As for our gratitude to them, well, I can't even put it into words here. So let's support the fundraiser. There's very little left to go. I'm asking you very much. Putin's demands for ending the war were voiced by Kremlin advisor Suslov. Well, in general, there's absolutely nothing new and everything is completely predictable. What do they want? A complete withdrawal of the armed forces of Ukraine from Donbas, Russia, leaving the Sumy, Dnipropetrovsk and Kharkiv regions, well, that's how it is, while maintaining the current front line in other directions. So, just to be clear, in the Sumy region, half of the settlements where the Russians had been stationed have already been liberated. Literally, in the past few days, several settlements have been cleared of this scourge. So, basically, they want to exchange a tiny handful, 3 or 4 settlements, let's say a few settlements, captured by the Russians right on the border for the Donbas. Look at how truly clever they are. I've already stated that if we were to give them the Donbas, if we were to abandon our territories, then bypassing all those strong fortifications that have held them back for 11 long years, they'll head straight for Kharkiv. That's their whole idea. What else do they want? Ukraine must not join NATO, demilitarization of Ukraine, and a constitutional reform towards a federal system. So we're also supposed to amend the constitution to prepare the ground for them to divide Ukraine even further, even more. In other words, since they can't achieve it militarily, they want to do it politically later on by buying up media influence and so on, right? And on top of that, Russia wants to sign a bilateral agreement with the US without Ukraine or the EU being involved. But that's simply Putin's dream. We'll decide the fate of those people, the ones Lenin invented. And the Europeans shouldn't even stick their noses in here. Well, there's a war. Never mind that there's a war in Europe, right? But we'll decide it ourselves. Basically, if Ukraine refuses, Putin wants Trump to completely stop all aid to Kyiv. Let's hope no one's rubber box cracks from the strain. I mean, I get that there's a brazen, old, Botoxed face, but for it to be this shameless, you really have to try. In the UK, look, they're asking Scholz, Macron and Callas not to comment on the Putin-Trump meeting. That's according to the Telegraph. British officials have called on EU leaders, including French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and Kaja Kallas, to stop making harmful, constant comments regarding the upcoming talks in Alaska between Trump and Putin. They warn that these kinds of public, damaging comments, such as saying that Ukraine's fate cannot be decided without Ukraine, or that Europe must be present at these negotiations, are problematic. These harmful comments can irritate Donald Trump, and they fear that making such public demands like, "Hey, Donald Trump," could have the opposite effect, and Trump might end up excluding Europe from the negotiations altogether, get angry, stomp his heel, his foot, or his hand. Look, we are not the leaders of the European Union, and no one is asking us to keep quiet, and we wouldn't anyway, so let's comment on it. When did that moment come when Europe lost its own position and agency? Well, not all of it. So when did it happen? The United Kingdom is asking, please keep it down, don't say anything. Trump will get angry, he'll wake up, get mad now, and then things will go badly. Look, Trump really can be irritated by public rhetoric, by not making any concessions to Putin at all. I don't know, maybe, excuse my French, give Putin a good kick in the butt. Like Trump, let's give it to him. Maybe. Trump's position is don't interfere. Now we're going to tie him up. I've already somehow dealt with this lunatic. Now if we irritate him, and Trump in turn is trying not to irritate Putin. So let's handle this carefully for now. Well, he's a little bit off, Let me just sign something with him, and if you give me the Nobel Peace Prize, that's it. Otherwise, Putin will slip off the hook, and that'll be the end of it. Trump's position is clear, or rather, it's like this. You can agree with it or not, but he doesn't know how to do things any other way. He's always acted like that. Yeah, you just have to read him. Well, I don't think he actually wrote those books himself. Someone wrote those books based on what he said about how he conned absolutely everyone in business, just everyone. So he just doesn't know how to do things any other way. But do you see what the situation is? Right now, the whole world is focused on not upsetting one man in his 70s and not making another man in his 70s angry. This isn't ageism or anything. It's just that somehow the whole world has somehow ended up here, but there are other ways after all. I mean, from Europe's side, you could provoke and antagonize Trump, or you could choose not to, or you could simply, lock it up, throw away the key, and transfer long-range weapons to Ukraine without making it public. That's right. Germany did the right thing by classifying the deliveries. There's no need to tell anyone anything. Well, one fine day, though not so fine for them, the Russians will find fragments of a Taurus missile somewhere at a completely burned-out oil refinery in the Moscow region. We should take a page from China's book. How does China respond? They say, we have nothing to do with it, we have no idea how it ended up there. We are not a party to the conflict. We are not a party to the conflict. There's no need to add fuel to the fire or, sour cream to borscht or anything else. We don't know, we're completely out of the loop. The Deng shopping terminal, Yeah, that's just what the Russians decided to call it, that's all. Trains are pouring in there from China one after another. Well, there are probably some technical details or something else we don't know. Just take China as an example. Meanwhile, they're giving Ukraine more long-range weapons. I just don't get it. Ukraine can now use up whatever is left from those Soviet-era factories. The Russians won't be able to restore them. If they're wiped out by missiles, the Russians won't be able to rebuild anything there. Right now, well, there's such an opportunity. How is that even possible? Fico and Orban decided to overachieve on making pro-Russian statements. They're like the Biba and Boba of European politics. Orban said today, "The Ukrainians have lost the war. Russia has won." Let me quote further. The only question is when and under what circumstances the West, which supports the Ukrainians, will admit that this has happened. Look how he and Fico have popped up in sync, right? That one is trying to convince everyone that Ukraine has lost. Like Kashpirovsky, he sits there chanting his mantra. They've lost. Believe me, they've lost. Well, what do you think? Let's draw a historical analogy and we'll see lost or not lost. What do you think? The USSR, which in exactly the same way once treacherously attacked Finland, even accusing Finland of wanting to attack the Soviet Union first. Can you imagine that? Finland and the Soviet Union. So, the USSR, which lost hundreds of thousands of its soldiers in that war, all it managed to do was bite off a piece of Finnish territory, which later became one of the most depressed regions. So, did the Soviet Union win that war? What do you think? Of course not. It was an indelible disgrace. And by the way, how did that happen? How did it happen that if the Soviet Union supposedly won every war and Russia never lost, then why is that? How did it happen that there isn't a single word about this war in the textbooks? And not a single word about this victorious war in Russian textbooks? Well, it wasn't in Soviet textbooks either. How come? They don't want to remember. In short, this is direct evidence that this disgrace, this shameful war, was deliberately hidden, covered up, so that no one would ever find out about it. Of course, the Soviet Union lost back then and got a beating, even though they had a much larger force in both numbers and equipment. They got slapped down hard and it stung, but everyone also remembers what the consequences were. It was this very war, as I have repeatedly said, that showed Hitler that the Soviet army was neither the first nor the second strongest in the world, and that he could attack the Soviet Union without any real concern. And so Hitler decided to attack. At first he watched from the sidelines, and then he struck. And now, in exactly the same way, China is quietly observing, only China doesn't need to attack. Everything has already been given away anyway. And this cunning Kremlin maniac Pukatilo has even taught his little Kabayon minions Chinese. Did you see how well he prepared? By the way, even Donald Trump is trying to play this game. Ukraine has lost. Well, you heard recently, right, that if Putin wanted to, he could be in Kyiv in 4 hours. Well, yeah. We all understand perfectly well that the entire Russian army, which got bogged down in someone's vegetable garden somewhere on the outskirts of Kyiv, that's the reality. Well, it's a very strange reality. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. I keep forgetting to remind you about this, but you shouldn't forget. So, if you don't believe that the entire Russian army got stuck in vegetable gardens, then be sure to subscribe. And now here we have Georgian Dream again. I don't know why they're doing this. Well, at this point, you could just call it the Russian Dream. So, what happened? Georgian Dream, the party in Georgia, is once again using footage from the war in Ukraine in its campaign ad. I watched this ad. On one side, the screen is split in two. On one side, there are scenes from the war in Ukraine, ruined cities, burned out buildings, strikes on hospitals and residential buildings. And on the other side, there is a blooming, vibrant, beautiful Georgia. Here, well, everything on this side is in black and white, and on the other, everything is bright and colorful. Roads, skyscrapers, and so on. And the main slogan there is "No to War." Didn't anyone feel anything after that? to take footage from Ukraine and show it, just to say, let's hope this never happens here. And on October 4th, elections will be held in Georgia. Let me remind you, last time Georgian Dream did the same thing. They took footage of the war and said, see how it is over there? We don't need that. We want our own, something beautiful like this. I've been to Georgia and I really liked it. And I worked both here in Ukraine with Mikhail Saakashvili, and in Georgia I have many acquaintances, all of them absolutely reasonable people. But to swap a European future for the Russian world, that really takes some doing. What the Georgian Dream is doing is a classic manipulation. Either we submit to the aggressor, to the abuser, or there will be war. Well, Putin is like a domestic abuser with the image of a peacemaker. In other words, he promises not to beat you as long as you sit quietly and don't look toward freedom. See how it goes. It's like Stockholm Syndrome playing out live. You know, when the hostage not only justifies the captor, but also persuades others to surrender. By the way, I've noticed that all pro-Russian forces regularly use this scare tactic on their own people. Orban, who says that under no circumstances should Ukraine be helped, and under no circumstances should Ukraine be accepted into the European Union. That's basically World War III. I think their next step will be to say, if you don't buy Russian gas, that's World War III. That's how far they've gone in their propaganda. They've just become completely senseless. And then there's Lukashenko, of course, who says, we live modestly but cleanly, at least there's no war. I saved you from war. We'll have to tighten our belts. There's no need to complain about anything. I, Lukashenko, unfortunately, can't really tighten my belt anymore. I've already expanded in every direction, so to speak. So who else is there? Milorad Dodik regularly claims that if you move towards NATO and, most importantly, give up special ties with Russia, then there will be war in the Balkans, instability and so on. Marine Le Pen, you remember, right? In her campaigns, she used to scare people by saying that strengthening sanctions against Russia would drag Europe into World War III. And then there's Georgian Dream. And here I need to point out that I not only don't associate, but I very clearly separate the citizens of Georgia from their government. And by the way, taking this opportunity, I want to say a huge thank you to the Georgian people for supporting Ukraine. A lot of people write to me, and here in Ukraine I have friends as well. So thank you for your support. As for Georgian Dream, by the way, Georgian Dream is deliberately sabotaging Georgia's path to the European Union. They've already reset all the programs there. Basically, no one is following any of the requirements. Slowly, quietly, so that no one notices, we're backing away toward that warm but quiet and stagnant swamp called the Russian Federation. I want to say that if back then, in distant 2008, Russia had been properly punished for what it did in Georgia, hello to Barack Obama, then maybe we wouldn't have this war in Ukraine now. And now some details about the meeting in Alaska have come in. The meeting between Trump and Putin will take place at a key American military base in Alaska on Friday, as you know, at the Elmendorf-Richardson base in Anchorage, where the Alaskan command of the U.S. Armed Forces is stationed. And Trump will make a one-day trip to Alaska for the meeting with Putin. And so, look, according to a White House representative, and by the way, this is a very important statement from Caroline Leavitt, the personal meeting between the two presidents will serve as a listening exercise for Trump, allowing him to better understand the plans that Putin has. The president is agreeing to this meeting at Putin's request. And the purpose of this meeting is to better understand how we can put an end to this war. Look, if it's going to be a listening exercise, then most likely Trump should prepare himself for tales about the Pechenegs, the Polovtsians, and a lecture on invented history. I wonder, will Putin hand Trump some kind of folder tied with strings? You know, some documents like he did with Tucker Carlson, remember? For Trump, it'll be like taking a ride with a taxi driver. And that Ukraine was invented by Lenin, and that we never attacked anyone, and that all these gay Satanists have taken over the whole planet. And actually, I'm great, though maybe it doesn't show on the outside. And anyway, my doctor prescribed me to wear heels so my posture would look nice. So all of this is going to be dumped on Donald Trump. But also, notice what a correct direction the White House is setting. Putin asked us, Trump will sit, listen, and then make the final decision about the fate of the Russian Federation. Well, we'll see. Or more precisely, about the sanctions. And yesterday there was an event, many of you remember it. Do you know why? Because for me, those words, actually those two words, she sank, with that idiotic smirk on Putin's face, I think it's impossible to forget them. I mean, it was such a wild, completely alien expression for a topic like that. Yesterday was the anniversary of the sinking of the submarine Kursk. People should have sounded the alarm when Putin made that idiotic smirk back then. He had just come to power at that time, and back then Sergei Dorenko could still expose Putin's lies, making programs that revealed all of Putin's rotten core. Well, I remembered that news because I came across another story. On the anniversary of the sinking of the Kursk, well, not the sinking, let's put it this way, now we understand that every -1 unit of Russian Federation military equipment is actually a plus today, meaning that this piece of military hardware will never work in the interests of civilized normal countries. So, the news is that the son of a submariner from the Kursk, 25-year-old Denis Ishmuratov, was killed in Ukraine, killed by the same Tsar. Or rather, he didn't just die, he died ingloriously in Ukraine, just like his father did 25 years ago. Well, just a little more, and Putin will be able to destroy a third generation in yet another invented, insane war. Well, you know what's important here? That it's well known Putin killed his father. There's that story when they were knocking, but under no circumstances were foreign rescuers allowed in, because God forbid they might find out some secrets. Let them die a painful death there, right? It's known that Putin killed them there. It's known that his son, for money, knowing that Putin was the killer, went to Ukraine to kill peaceful neighbors. So in fact, Putin killed him too, but maybe he also got some money. Back then, probably the families were also paid a lot to keep quiet. Remember how they threw themselves at Putin, sobbing. Some FSO women were injecting them with syringes, and then everything went quiet. Everyone got paid off. Believe me, the main thing is that this dead-end branch of humanity, specifically these people and all the others who fight for Putin, who serve Putin, should not leave any more offspring. Because if there is a third generation, and that third generation, knowing that Putin killed their grandfather, their father, will themselves go off to fight. This is what makes the Russian Federation so frightening. Here in Ukraine, our best citizens, our heroes, died defending their land, while over there, human trash comes here to fight for money. Unfortunately, there is quite a lot of that human trash over there. But Ukraine has shown the whole world that even such a huge aggressor can be held back. And if there were just a bit more help, if Europe made a real effort, yes. We keep discussing what Trump or Putin will say or decide, but Europe could have already come together and consolidated over these years. Ukraine would have had long-range weapons a long time ago. Putin would already be somewhere beyond the Ural Mountains, stuffing his bunkers. You see what I mean? But we believe in the armed forces of Ukraine. We believe in our Ukraine. Friends, take care of yourselves. Take care of your loved ones.